All right, so in one of my recent videos, I told you about a client that we got all the way up to $2.5 million a month, started at $300K a month, took about 8 months to get there, and then I talked about the very unfortunate demise and the downside of that deal. So I figured in this video, I'd tell you more about the upside of a different client, a client that went from $100,000 a month when we first found them in January of 2024. 13 months later, they're sitting at 1.4 million and some change cash collected. I'm gonna go through the funnel strategy, the advertising strategy, and I'm gonna talk through just some lessons that were learned along the way. This client in particular is still on an uptrend, doing a tremendous job. One of my most recent deals that we've gotten $1 million months, and also one of my favorites. If you're new to the channel, my name's Jeremy Haynes. All we do around here is talk about hitting $1 million months. Ideally, you're already starting off somewhere in like the couple 100K range, or you're at $1 million a month already and you're looking to tack on the next million if you're learning these kinds of lessons. We don't make any income claims here. Nothing that we talk about on this channel is implied that you're actually gonna turn around and make some money. More so, it's just handing down the lessons from all these $1 million a month earners so you can potentially do something with it in your business that can improve it. Again, if you're already a subscriber, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you. Without further ado, let's dive into it. So this particular client got referred to me by a mutual friend. They were in need of somebody like me. They had heard stories. We had another deal that we had done. I think I had actually talked about it on this channel prior. It was a client that we had gotten to over $22 million. Took about 18 months. They got bought out for $40 million. If you haven't watched that video, go check it out after this one. My channel's full of incredible videos like that. So anyway, that particular client's niche, okay, was very similar to this referral that we had gotten through the mutual friend. They had heard about us and the big revenue that we had done for that other deal. And on top of that, they had also heard we were no longer a part of the deal due to the fact that client exited. So we accepted the intro and we became a consultant for this specific deal. They had a marketer, they had a sales manager, they had a sales team, very small sales team initially. They had somebody working on Google AdWords initially that along the way in the deal had gotten replaced for somebody else. And on top of the fact they're a consulting deal, generally with anybody who works with us as a consultant, we also throw them into the inner circle offer that we have, which you can find a link for down in the description. So this client started with us in January. And like I said, their niche was very familiar to us. We had already absolutely run it up and been in that space, clear it, just printing money, just clearing cash. So we thought it'd be easy game. And lo and behold, it was. So when we first got a hold of this deal, we told him exactly what that previous client had done, which was a really simple call funnel. As a matter of fact, I'll draw it out for you here in terms of how simple it is. It was a headline, a VSL, and an application. And the application was, of course, with Typeform, and we had integrated Calendly into it, which if you've watched my pinned video on my channel where I talk about how to do 40 to 50 qualified sales calls a day who are showed up and ready to close, you'll know that this is one of my favorite simplistic call funnels that you can possibly run. It does such a phenomenal job at getting a very cost-effective cost per qualified call and a very high volume of calls. Just holds stable at scale. So anyway, we encourage that this client does the same. We crafted a VSL with them. We helped them put the funnel together by giving them a tremendous amount of examples, as we do with any inner circle member or consultant, of course. And this particular funnel had two different outcomes. Those two different outcomes were a qualified confirmation page where the people who were financially qualified and answered the questions the right way were pushed to. We optimized this specific page for the schedule standard event like usual. We had also, just as a pro tip, peppered in the complete registration standard event there as well. And then we had the unqualified confirmation page. This page is for the people who, as described, were not qualified based on the questions that they answered. Now, this page technically had a pixel on it. When I say it wasn't pixeled, I just simply mean it didn't have a standard event code placed onto the page. We still put a pixel on all the pages on a website, of course. This downsell here was a $5,000 offer. The main offer for the people that were qualified was a $15,000 offer and a $25,000 option as well. So those were the two main offers that this specific client had. Now, when we first came into this deal, like I said, they were at 100K a month. There was a tremendous amount of mental reform required in order to get a client from that level of income to where we ideally want people to be, which is over $1 million a month. That's a very overlooked part of the process for almost everybody out there. It's very uncommon as a marketer or as an agency that you feel a responsibility to come in and, like I described, reform your client's mental state, the culture of the business, okay? We come in as a dominating force in terms of the culture that we bring to the business. We have a let's go fast mentality. We have a revenue above all else mentality. Okay? And we're very unsettled with people who don't hold each other accountable to do their different functions and roles within the business and organization. We come in and we just push the fuck out of that deal. And we need the client to be on the same page with that. So one thing that I noticed in this specific deal, and it wasn't just with the business owner, it was with all the key players within the business. They lived more of a lifestyle business up to that point. And that was self-admitted by them too. It's not like they were oblivious to it. I mean, almost everybody who lives a lifestyle business is very self-aware of that, and they intentionally do it, of course. So anyway, these people were living in Bali, Costa Rica, Colombia, like just, traveling around Australia and just fucking moving all over the world. And again, there's nothing wrong with that if you're a serious person and like you're doing serious work along the way. It becomes a little problematic when, like I said, you're just prioritizing lifestyle above the scale potential and the growth of the organization. So we don't have an issue with that like I described. We just more so make it very clear of what types of mental traits and characteristics you have to have if you actually want to hit $1 million a month. And that was the whole reason this client had hired us. They wanted us to come in and improve their odds and probabilities of hitting that number and making it real. So, like I said, started off with a lot of mental reform. After we got that funnel built, after we started doing the mental training, we obviously just started building what we consider a scale plan, okay? Almost all organizations. This is actually something I'm talking about in depth at our upcoming Inner Circle Mastermind. We do quarterly masterminds in that group. We do them right here at the Penthouse in Miami, Florida. We have a big old movie theater room downstairs where we have almost 75-ish people to 100 plus people that come out of the entire group. Usually about half the people show up to each one of these events. We also do the one-on-one calls, the weekly group calls, and the Telegram chat, the group chat full of rich people trying to get a hell of a lot richer. Extremely active group and community full of people literally just like this that I'm about to describe. We actually have a great testimonial from this client on our page that you can go check out after this as an example of that. But I digress. One of the things that I'm talking about at this upcoming mastermind here on this Saturday is a very important principle, okay? Which is a scaling plan. Like most people are completely oblivious to how much they're willing to spend on acquiring a customer. They're oblivious to the KPIs because nobody ever does fucking math, That's the craziest thing about scaling up. There's, in most instances, in almost all organizations that we come into, like they'll track their data. Okay, so when I start talking about math and I start talking about financial modeling and I start talking about projections and I start talking about like how high of a cost per qualified call can you endure and how high can you endure on this channel versus that channel, what is the, in this particular client, they had a 2-call close process. So they have the cost per qualified call, they have the first call show rate, the second call booking rate, the second call show rate, the close rate, and the AOV, okay? They got all of that to factor into their financial model. And just upon doing the math, this particular client, they wanted around like $100 to $200 cost per qualified call, as almost everybody does. But what they found out is they can endure up to about a $600 cost per qualified call on Facebook and Instagram, and they can endure up to a $1,125 cost per call on Google AdWords, whether it be through the search engines or through YouTube. We never use the display network. The display network's absolute trash. It's good for retargeting, but really nothing else. So anyway, these two numbers being made apparent with some rather conservative follow-up KPIs. So we made them aware, just based on the current statistics, with that factored in for that cost per qualified call, what the first call show rate had to be, what the second call booking rate had to be, what the second call show rate had to be, what the close rate had to be, and what the AOV had to be. And we fleshed out that with these specific KPIs staying within those ranges, they could scale the fuck out of their business confidently, well above and beyond the statistics that they had previously thought they could endure. Okay? Once you make that aware to a business and to the people a part of it, everybody immediately unlocks a totally new level of certainty and confidence. Okay? Without those numbers being top of mind, you're just randomly going about scaling. You don't have any clarity into the statistics. So what generally happens is you'll start the process of spending more money. Statistics will fluctuate a little bit because you have no idea, because you've never done math, financial modeling math to be clear, what you can endure. You just shut everything off or you scale things back. And you end up being a pussy instead of scaling up aggressively. Because again, you just don't have the certainty that comes from the mathematical numbers, okay? So anyway, I make the math clear, okay? Then we build what we consider a scaling plan. So if you look at the 7 days a week, okay, and you have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Okay, one thing that we noticed is, and remember, they had a 2-call close process. There would be a tremendous amount of calls. So there'd be a higher volume of calls on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that would not get taken until Monday and Tuesday. Now, there would be a high volume of these setter calls, that first call, on Monday and Tuesday for the first half of the week, and then there would be very little setter calls that would happen on Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, okay? So this caused for, some clarity right away in terms of what could be done, how the scaling could be executed to make it as efficient and balanced as possible. Okay, one thing that we also noticed is if we allowed somebody to book within the same day or even the next day, there wouldn't be a lot of time to get the framing material off. One of the biggest things that happens in call funnels is your sales team will bitch that people are unqualified. And in reality, that's just really unarticulate sales feedback. If this is where a new lead comes in and this is where they close, and this is the start of the process and this is the finish of the process, if you book somebody into a call, you're typically getting them to a closer here if you do a call funnel. And that is going to be perceived as unqualified because they're too early in the sales process. I don't want to make it sound like I'm one of those marketers that just fucking hates salespeople and constantly clashes with them. I don't. I love salespeople. I identify as a salesperson myself too. They're not wrong though. They're not wrong in saying that they're unqualified. Simply put, they're just not ready to close yet. And you as the business owner, you're naturally naive to the statistics and scaling math and how things work. And you end up saying, oh, well, marketer, all my leads are coming through unqualified, like fix it, Or eventually you blame the other side. You start blaming the salespeople and you're like, oh, my salespeople suck. In reality, and we've talked about this many times over on this channel, you have to have content marketing strategies worked in between the call being booked and the call being taken. Even if it's in a 2-call close model, having content that strategically hammers people at key steps of the process makes for a much more qualified lead that ends up being much further along in the sales process. With content in between the call booking and them actually talking to the closer's feedback typically changes. They no longer say that they're unqualified. They just start saying, hey, it might take one more call, but I feel good about these leads. They're qualified. They feel sophisticated. Simply put, the feedback will change. But again, it takes content throughout this first part of the process before they talk to a closer to get that feedback change. Okay? Back to my math here, okay? When we're building out a scaling plan, we like to look at the 7 days a week. Are closers taking calls on the weekend? For this client, the answer was no. So they're only taking calls Monday through Friday, and there eventually became a point in this deal, to be clear, where we adjusted the scale plan a bit, and we found out that they were taking calls on Saturdays, not all the closers, but a few of the closers. So we can adjust the scaling plan as time goes on. The biggest issue was that we saw a big jump in the quantity of calls that would come in at the beginning of the week, and then it would be like a small trickle until the next, 4 or 5 days. And then a big jump on Monday, Tuesday, and then a big slump on the next 4 to 5 days. And then a big jump on Monday and Tuesday. You get the pattern there? So what we started to do, and this might sound a little interesting to some of you because you've never built scaling plans, but this ended up being a really good idea. On Sunday and Wednesday, those were the days that we would both put up budget and pull down budget. So on Wednesday, we would do a 30% jump in budget. And on Sunday, we would do a 10% reduction in budget, okay? And we laid it out in a table and we demonstrated, okay, so we're starting off here in our daily ad spend. If we bump it up 30% once a week and pull it back 10%, obviously that equates to 20% week over week, but the reason we would do that is we wanted to get more calls on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for the setters, okay? Because that would lead to more closer calls, that second call, on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the following week. That would also give enough time for content to hammer the fuck out of those people. What we also wanted to do is we wanted to reduce the quantity of setter calls that would happen on Monday and Tuesday, because there was already going to be a lot of calls on Monday and Tuesday because the setters weren't taking calls on the weekends. Okay, neither were the closers. So this scaling math, as simple as it sounds, it doesn't necessarily come off initially as too aggressive. And that's right where you want to be, because as time goes on, Okay, keep in mind, this deal went from 100K a month in January 2024. They hit $1 million a month in December of 2024. They had barely cleared. In November and October of 2024, they had done a little over 900K. One month was like in the 940s and one month was in the 950s. Quite frustrating if you're me, because I was really trying to hit that $1 million a month sooner than December in that fiscal year, but you know, it is what it is. Fast forward to March. March, they cleared 1.4 and some change, cash collected, not fucking revenue, cash collected, every number I'm saying here. And again, that scale, all right, it starts off small and then it gets real serious when you're scaling like $8,000 a day, 30%, and $12,000 a day, 30%. You know, the number starts to jump dramatically. This type of scaling plan also, when just projected out and followed religiously, gives your closers enough time to factor in closer math. So this was some of the immediate clarity that we brought into this deal, okay? And this is really important to understand. It enabled the marketer and the sales management of this organization to work hand in hand to be able to get clarity on when more setters were needed, when more closers were needed, projecting that the cost per qualified call would stay relatively the same. Okay? There's also just one thing I don't necessarily want to glaze over it. I really want to emphasize it because so many of you do this and you really fuck this up. You think a $500 to $1,100 cost per qualified call is insane, okay? And you're like, there's no fucking way that that can be profitable, you know, and scaled up. But it is, and it was, and it still is today for this specific business. You just don't do math, okay? Again, you just don't do math. You just ask other people. You just like, hey, what should a cost per qualified call be?
And you hear somebody say like, oh yeah, I get like a $50, $100, $200 cost per qualified call.
And therefore that's your assumed cost per call. But it's different for every single industry. It's different for every single niche. And again, give or take the quality of the person you're going after, it might just be more expensive. I always like to give this example of like personal injury lawyers or people who are bidding for like a really high dollar value insurance as an example. If you have Google AdWords analytic data that you can typically find through tools like SpyFu or, you know, simply put, just other analytic softwares that are out there that give you insights into costs and projections. You can even do this in the Google AdWords platform itself, but I like to look at it through, like I said, like some of these third-party analytic tools. They're typically a little more like precise, less of a range, more precise. And you'll see that like a cost per click, okay? Not even a cost per qualified call. Cost per click can be like $200, $500 for some of these niches that have really high dollar value, revenue on the other side of that conversion happening, okay? So just think about that. Anyway, back to the story. So once we get this scaling plan in play, okay, the marketer on both Facebook and Google AdWords has precise clarity into when they're scaling, when they're pulling back a little bit, what range of KPI they need to be within. Obviously, we start talking to them about best practices like ad fatigue and conditioning the business on what kind of habits they need to fall into in order to just maintain cost efficiency. We obviously start looking at data and training them on just how to be mindful of everything and CRO actions. We implement strategies like my Hammer Them strategy, which we have entire videos on in this channel that you can check out and look into. That way we introduce that content remarketing that we talked about to help frame the leads to show up at a higher rate, to close at a higher rate. And that reflects extremely well in this business. This business's show rates are typically in like the low 60s in a worst case scenario, all the way up into the high 70s, give or take the time frame of this deal. Their close rates, I literally don't think I've ever seen their close rate fall below the mid 30s. Generally, they can even hit low 40s for their close rate. Their AOV on average, factoring in that they have a 5K drop sell, $15,000 for their main offer, and then a $25,000 higher priced offer, okay, that they'll also still sell over the phone to the people that are more qualified for it. That AOV would typically range from like, in a worst case scenario, maybe $9,000 all the way up to about $13,000 to $14,000. Tremendous, okay? These statistics played out extremely well. Now, this is a business, it's also really good to point out in terms of how it turns out today. So right now they do about $1.4 million a month, okay? Like I said, that was their most recent cash collected month. We're a few days into April right now while I sit here and film this for you. So long story short, again, just a few days after the month ended is when we're reflecting on that 1.4 mil cash collected. They spent just above $400,000 in ad spend to be able to produce that 1.4 million, okay? So just right off the rip, they're in the 900,000s when you just deduct the ad spend. Okay, factor out roughly another 20% of that. That's going to go towards closers, give or take. Okay, I think it falls into the high teens, but we'll just call it 20% to be conservative. Okay, that puts the business into like the mid couple hundred thousands. They then have some coaches that they have on their staff, just general payroll positions, people like myself, consultants in the deal. And that ends up netting this business low couple $100,000, somewhere between, give or take the month, like 300 and 500. Again, just factoring in ad costs and things like this. Now, at this point in the business, for where they're at literally today, okay, they are currently focused on efficiency now. So there's a really tremendous lesson here that I want to pass down that I think a lot of organizations that hit scale eventually fall into. And it can be a really abrupt pattern to endure through if you're not aware of it. Okay, and that's the unfortunate thing about this specific lesson I'm going to discuss now is not a lot of organizations understand the ramifications of this type of thinking. But my favorite clients, these people included, they can hear me out on these kind of things and they do something about it rather than just learning the lesson the hard way. Okay, which is what you pay consultants for, which is what you pay people who are mentors to you for. That's why people like this are in the Inner Circle program. Okay, that's why people like this are in my consulting deals, which you can find links for in the description. Okay, here's my point. They ended up, when they hit that 1.4 mil a month, looking at their cost of acquiring a customer. And they said, okay, we ideally want to have a 40% profit margin. They're currently operating in like the mid 20s to low 30s, give or take the month. They said, I want a 40% profit margin. They brought in a CFO and they brought in kind of like I don't really know the positions underneath the CFO's department, but like somebody who's kind of responsible for ensuring that happens and like looking at the numbers, but it's not the CFO showing up onto these calls. It's like that person. So anyway, the organization starts to project like these goals, okay? And one of the biggest almost mistakes is how I interpret it that this organization started to make that thankfully they reverted away from was saying, we're gonna take 30% of the last month's cash collected and that's gonna be the next month's budget. Okay, so like I said, they spent a little over $400,000 in ad spend for that month of March to do the 1.4 million in revenue. The $1.4 million in cash collected, if you take 30% of that budget, it ended up being just shy, like just a little bit shy of the budget that they had spent the previous month. Now, what has fueled their growth month over month has been the scaling plan, okay? That's what's enabled them to consistently grow, okay? So a business really has two different ways they can operate. And some people like to think you could do both at once, but it's a competing force within the organization, okay? You either are essentially sacrificing some profit that you'd otherwise capture on growth. It's a reinvestment, right? If you look at what they had asked, it's not unreasonable what they asked to be at a 40% profit margin, right? They were already in the mid 20s to low 30s, give or take the month. However, that additional percentage that they're looking to capture and put in their pocket is the percentage that gets reinvested into continuing to grow the number, you see? Versus if you take that same percentage that's going to be reinvested into growth and you put it in your pocket instead, you're sacrificing the growth. And you're essentially saying, I'm okay with plateauing here. This is where I want to be. I want to kind of entrench myself into this dollar value position. And I officially want to extract as much profit as I can possibly get out of this thing. Okay? Now, this organization, like I said, they weren't aware that they were essentially having that competing force and had that option and chose to sacrifice growth and officially start to capture more profit. Once I made them very aware of it with all kinds of numbers, all kinds of historical client examples, I just really sold them on this situation that they were putting themselves into. Immediately, they recognized something really important. They recognized, okay, we still have to, kind of sacrifice that until we get to this bigger number. There's also a really important kind of lesson that underlies that same thing I just taught you, which is, again, really just undermined by almost all organizations. Macro trends, okay? This specific business currently has really favorable macro trends that are absolutely playing into their growth. Okay, the current population of Earth completely agrees with what these people sell. There's more and more people that are continuing to essentially participate in this way of thinking for what this business is selling into. And that obviously is going to fuel a lot of growth. It's going to make acquiring customers more cost effective. It's going to make growth easier. Just month over month over month, they're going to be able to continue pushing up as that macro trend continues to push up. Okay. At the same time, the exact opposite is also true. When that macro trend goes away, or even worse, plays against you, okay, you will naturally be less profitable. You will naturally have to pay more to acquire customers. It'll naturally have more friction to scale and to capture that growth that you want. Okay. And again, this is a big thing that's really undermined by organizations. Most people don't pay attention to this. I want to make a great example of the downside, right? We had some clients that were in the Airbnb space. okay, that were teaching people like, hey, come and learn how to be a part of Airbnb. And as a result of that, when Airbnb was in its absolute heyday and its prime, there was nothing but great things that people were saying. Every single host that you heard from was just clearing cash. Obviously, consumers, as they continued to hear about Airbnb, started using Airbnb and had nothing but great things to say. Now, you're probably listening to that. That's not what I think about Airbnb today. And you're right, because that mental trend had changed, okay? Today, most people think extremely poorly of Airbnb, okay? They think of like, I gotta do the fucking dishes and make the bed and take the trash out and like follow all these rules, and there's probably some hidden cameras around me that are just watching me all the time, maybe even microphones listening in. They think, and the hosts, they think of all the people who are like partying inside of Airbnbs, and they put noise monitors into the homes now, and just, again, like there's been stories of hosts that have had to just unload their properties because they're getting fucked and there's not a lot of profitability. And then there's big cities, like major cities, that are denying Airbnb and short-term rentals from existing within their municipalities. Okay? And that's the current narrative and trend. And then I'm talking like just recently, very recently, it's more in like a neutral zone again, where I think Airbnb's kind of found the sweet spot. If you actually have seen a recent Airbnb commercial, like I literally never really watch TV, okay? But I occasionally watch like a sporting event on TV. I was watching some game recently and I saw an Airbnb commercial, and it was perfect. I felt like they really found their sweet spot. It showed a family going on a trip, and it showed them going to a hotel. And that family was all separated into different rooms within the hotel, and like it showed all the walls between the families, and it showed kind of like a sad family, and then it switched to having them all within a larger home, what appeared to be on a lake or some body of water, and it said, some trips are better with Airbnb. And I thought that was such a baller hook, such a clean hook, because it's true. Although yes, a lot of people favor hotels right now, at the same time, arguably some trips are actually better with Airbnb. So I've also heard far less of that extremely awful, propaganda and set of stories that are playing against Airbnb's narrative recently. It feels like we're back into kind of like a neutral zone. Now, to no surprise, during the heyday of when it was nothing but great things that you're hearing about the platform, everybody's making a fuckload of money, okay? And then during the time where it got really bad, a lot of those same people, they came to us during those times and they were like, look, I don't know what's going on. Like, I need a consultant. Like, I need to join into this inner circle thing you've got. I need help. I need insight. Like, what do you think? And I give them that example. And I tell them, I'm like, look, it's a great time to like increase pricing. It's a great time to offset some of those costs. Like, you're gonna have to endure because the macro trend is currently against you. Right now, when it's back to more of a neutral zone, we've seen all of the profit margins for those types of businesses dramatically increase. Very much so, okay? So anyway, we have this specific client to look at as a great example of a current macro trend playing in their favor rather than actively against them, like that Airbnb example. And I made them very aware of this. I said, guys, just to really sell you on this, I think this is an awful time to do this efficiency play. Like, you're still capturing a lot of money. And look, mid 20s to even low 30s of profit margin, if this thing goes to 2 million a month, 3 million a month, which it absolutely has the legs to do, would still capture you literally more than what 40% of right now's numbers would if we just immediately optimize for efficiency. So they had, after that specific call, taken about an hour to reflect together, got back to myself, the advertisers, the sales team, and concluded, look, we're gonna go all in on growth right now. We're happy where we're at. Once we reach like 3 million a month, I think that's the level where we're gonna try to optimize around efficiency and get the margin up overall, and maybe we just kind of entrench ourselves there. And look, that's up to every organization to individually decide upon. But nonetheless, my job as the consultant in that example, my job as helping this inner circle member is to get them to the point where they have that self-awareness of what they're up against, and what they're actively choosing to do. Because so many organizations don't have that. So many organizations fall victim to that. And like I said, there's just competing forces in your organization, especially at scale, that you start to see that just don't happen when you're at, 100K a month. 100K a month or a couple 100K a month, it's all about sales and marketing. It's all about continuing to fulfill on the people that you sell operationally, but it's really just let's fucking grow, baby, grow. Once you get to a bigger number, you absolutely start to look at how much more you can capture, and you start to bring in more professional people into your organization that you can finally afford. You start to bring in a proper executive team, and there's naturally going to be, like I said, some new competing forces, like this CFO department that was brought in that's going to just try to clash and optimize for efficiency and not consider those things that I articulated. So anyway, thankfully, this organization is really smart. There are so many more lessons that I could talk about with this specific company. It's, again, again, a current deal, current Inner Circle member, probably one of my favorite recent deals that we've been a part of. Oh, and by the way, we hit number 41 in all my videos. If you just kind of watch them historically, you'll see like where we're at in terms of total clients that we've helped hit $1 million months. We've just recently hit number 41, and coincidentally, it was actually an Airbnb offer that added a second offer to what they do. I'll talk about that in future videos. There's videos just like this. There's videos on strategies that we use within these organizations from a marketing and sales perspective. There's very tactical videos of how to overcome specific problems. There's videos on my page about what not to do as well. I'd really encourage that you dive in and catch up on all the videos that you may have missed. If you're at a couple $100K a month, you're trying to get a hell of a lot richer than you are now, you're at $1 million a month and you want to tack on that next $1 million a month, I'd actively encourage you to check out those links in the description for my Inner Circle offer. Maybe you can be an agency client of ours. And at the very least, go and train your staff or train yourself through our Master Internet Marketing program. 7 weeks of very intense, very dense amounts of marketing information and best practices. Also, all offers that we have now come with AI Jeremy. AI Jeremy is not one of those AI gimmicks. It's trained on a decade of my career's material, voice notes, texts, podcasts, speaking gigs, YouTube videos, almost just shy of 1,000 training videos. Every single thing I could possibly add to it that we cleaned and ensured was tremendous in terms of the value that AI Jeremy could turn around and reciprocate to you, we've added and trained that AI on. We also continue to train it. It is one day behind real Jeremy. So what I capture and document today, just like this video, gets trained on the bot the following day. We have access to it in all of our communities. You can one-on-one DM it, give or take what specific offer you are a part of with us. In addition to that, we have a module inside of all of our training libraries where you can go and do voice calls, Zoom calls, a video call with it, and obviously message with it as well. It is extremely practical and very, very good feedback that we've gotten from it so far from all of our students and our Inner Circle members and clients alike. So I really look forward to helping you get richer. Again, whether you get into any of our paid offers or not, go check out some of my other videos, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.